Welcome, everybody, to the Depths of Motherhood podcast. I'm your host, Danielle. Today, Alice Garner joins us on the show. Welcome, Alice.
Hi.
I'm so happy to have you here. Alice is one of our members in the women's circle, and she reached out to me very recently and was shining the light on this gap that there is when it comes to supporting the mother with her physiological needs during active miscarriage, pregnancy loss. We're going to use different terms today and explain, I'm explore how they make us feel. But through this time and also following a pregnancy loss as well. And so I have put like a trigger warning on this as I've uploaded this recording because I know for many this will trigger a lot and maybe this isn't the right time to listen. If you're here, you're listening and you have experienced a pregnancy loss, the death of a child, I am sending you so much love and I am deliberately slowing down to choose my words carefully because language is magic. Words are magic and they can be nourishing and they can be extremely triggering. That being said, in this space where we're witnessing and holding Alice here with love, allow her words to come through in any way that they like and notice your own triggers if you have them. So much love for what arises. And also, no judgment is made on any language used so that you can just drop into this space without concern that might be triggering for someone because this whole thing can be triggering, never mind the language. So the reason really that we're here today is to bring light in the hope that we can offer support and tools and insights that can support mothers going through this rite of passage. Because when Alice reached out, she let me know, like, there's a lot about the emotional and the spiritual aspect. And then I realized, yeah, that's so true when I've dug into this a little bit more. But nothing, I'm not saying nothing, but it's harder to get your hands on supportive information around how to support the physiological needs that are arising during active pregnancy loss and following as well. And so we came together and we've created these offerings of two gatherings. One is happening this Sunday. If you're listening today, it's happening very soon, but the recording will be available. And in this gathering, we're using medicine through stories shared. We're also looking at terminology. The first gathering is the physiological needs during active pregnancy loss. And the second gathering will be more towards the postpartum phase. And I've opened this up to birth keepers and families as well, because I feel that this is an area that is much needed for all of us supporting the mother. So if you're interested, you can go to the show notes and check that out. But today we are going to be getting to know Alice much deeper. And she just shared this is the first time that she's really been so public with this. So I just want to say thank you so much for opening up to this conversation. And let's start by finding out where you are in the world. Alice, where are you in the world?
So I'm in Scotland. I'm on the west coast of Scotland in a small little town called Largs. Um, it's not my birth home. We relocated here like more than 6 months ago now, I think. Um, but yeah, my accent kind of gives it away. But yeah, born and bred in the Midlands in Derbyshire. um, but yeah, we're just rocking it here in Scotland at the moment. Just go with the flow, really.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, that's that's the crunch of it, really. It's really
I
exciting.
love Scotland so much. It's so beautiful. I can see why you would move there. Yes. So I am thankful
It,
for you because it's your nighttime now. So you're like in cozy mode. I am in daytime mode. So if you're noticing difference in our energies, like actually we are in different time zones right now. So I'm like trying to like, okay, let me just bring myself into nighttime vibes. So before we begin, is let's just talk about language for a moment. Is there any types of language that you feel is more nourishing about this conversation? And words that you consciously try to avoid.
yeah, it's interesting because when we obviously were going through the process, I actually journaled about it quite a lot. And I even struggled to type miscarriage into my journal. So I typed my journal into my phone and stuff. And I really struggled to type it because I don't know, I think miscarriage is a very difficult word. I think it's a word that it's like, I like to call it a gateway. It's
Mm,
people understand straight away. As soon as you say, I've had a miscarriage, people get it. And they're like, okay, okay. But yeah, I kind of used to throw the word around of loss or the aspect of the body letting go, because
mm,
that's kind of how it felt to me, was kind of okay, the body decided that this wasn't, it wasn't right, I
mm,
guess. Um so yeah, that is, when I kind of refer to it to myself or to my husband, or when my journal or whatever, it usually is kind of like a letting go. um yeah, a loss, I suppose. I think the death side of thing came more with myself, if I'm
mm,
honest. I think I went through a death of that, an experience. A part of me died with it, kind of thing. That without sounding so drastic. Um, but yeah, miscarriage is it's a very odd word. When I think miscarriage, I think mistake. That's my
mm.
first thought, because I think miss, and you associate that with something that's wrong, uh, which I guess in scientific terms, maybe that's kind of what it is. Maybe, I don't know. I find myself in the very early stages of it, trying to kind of comprehend it from a very scientific point of view. I don't know why. I don't know if that was just a way of me processing it and accepting it, maybe, because I like to trust my body. I like to understand that my body knows what's right. I always kind of separate the two of us. My mind is the spirit kind of thing, but the body is it's so clever. It's so,
Mm.
like I already have a son, so I know the beauty of birth and carrying a child and things like that. So yeah, I know a lot of people feel the same with miscarriage, like the word miscarriage, but it's a word that, people who haven't had it, it's all, I've had a miscarriage, and people just go, ah, okay. Um, but yeah. It's
It's
a very strange one,
it's an
definitely.
interesting place to start because I feel like words hold so much power, and it's not to like get caught up in the language, but language means something and it originates from somewhere. So when we have our first gathering, we're really going to unpick like what are the roots of these words and maybe why do they not fully sit with us? Because maybe within the words that we use so often, that there is actually a message underneath that and it doesn't resonate and that it doesn't hold as much truth when you start to unpick it. I just wanted to start there because I think it is I feel for myself when I take language, it is kind of like a starting point for me anyway to see what are my deeper beliefs, like how does this affect me on all levels. So thank you for articulating how you feel about this and where you're at with this right now. So let's go into, is this the first time that you have experienced a pregnancy loss?
Yes, this is the first time. Um, yeah, like I say, I've got a son. He's 4. Um, but yeah, it was my first experience.
Hmm. Um, and I'll just open up this space so you can share your story if you want to share when this happened and from the beginning and just move through it.
Okay. Um, so the miscarriage happened, I think it was November, I think November time. Um, so just to kind of give you a bit of background, um, the decision to have another child had been a huge one for me and my husband. It'd been a really long journey. We had my son 10 days before the first lockdown. So we got thrown into the initiation of parenthood and then having the isolation. So we held a lot of hurt and pain, I think, from that time. You know, it was difficult, it was isolated, out of no choice of our own, but other, So the decision to have another one had been a huge decision. My son's 4 in March now. So um up until very, very recently, actually, we'd started to even consider it again. So, and I think even months just before we kind of really decided, like, hey, let's go for it, my husband had to kind of sit and trail through his emotions because there was a lot resurfacing for him in relation to when my son was born. Is this the right decision? Do I really want to do this again? Um, so, so yeah, that just kind of gives you a bit of a background of kind of where our heads were initially, anyway. And I think we just were like, hey, you know what? Let's just go for it. Let's just see what happens, kind of thing. And and so yeah, so we caught really quickly. We're really fortunate and grateful for that because so many people that don't have that blessing straight away. But yeah, we caught really quickly, and I knew I was pregnant really early on because I started getting all the symptoms quite early. Um, but yeah, and the usual, I took a pregnancy test quite early on. Around, I think I was roughly about 4 to 5 weeks that I consider myself to be. And yeah, I got the little blue plus sign. I remember ringing my husband. I was like, "Oh my god, we're gonna do this again! Oh my god!" And I think that moment we realized was like, "This is it now. We can't do it back. This is it." Like, um, it means a baby now, because, and I think you can't help with, especially second pregnancy. I think you can't help but compare to your first because it's your only experience that you've had. So, I try to think about how it was when I found out I was pregnant with my son, and I was like, oh my god, this is so crazy that we're doing this again. And my husband was really happy, and I think in that moment he'd had all these kind of like uncertainty. I think he said in that moment, no, this is what I want, like this, I feel so good about it, like this is what I want, kind of thing. And yeah, again, I remember I was trying to think back, thinking, what do I do now? Like, what happens now? So I remember ringing my GP like straight away, and I was like, what's the process? Like, oh my god, I'm pregnant again. Like, what's the process? What do I need to go through? And yeah, I informed them, got a call from the midwife, and she was like, I'm going to get you for a booking appointment. And, oh, do you want a home birth? And I was like, yeah, I had a home birth for my son. It's really exciting, and blah, blah, blah. And then, yeah, we just, as a family, just started living in that kind of bliss, I guess, of, hand on belly, falling in love with it kind of thing, and the idea, and start planning and future of having another one. And then, yeah, I started feeling really, like I was feeling very like sick very, very early on. I remember sitting there thinking, like, I don't remember being like this with Jack. And then, obviously you Google it, you think like, oh, what's kind of like, what's the deal type of thing. And I mean, Google, why do we do it? Why do we Google things? Especially
I
as
know.
parents, why do we do
It's like the
it?
worst thing ever, right? Honestly.
it, it is. Um, so yeah, so Google just basically said, you know, second child has, you know, different symptoms, blah blah blah, everything's different. So I was like, okay, that's fine. And yeah, it kind of got to like, I think the second to third day that we'd found out, and I remember just like sitting on the sofa and I just couldn't move. And I was looking after my son, and you know, he's like, he's a toddler. So he's like, come on, mommy, we need to get up, we need to do stuff. And I was just like, I just feel so wiped, like I can't do anything. And I literally remember feeling like I couldn't move my body. Like I felt like my body was so fragile. Um, and something was like pulling me to just sit and relax. And I just remember thinking, like trying to fight against it. You know, I've got my child to look after. I haven't got time to sit down, kind of thing. And I remember like frantically Googling about how I can start doing this like pregnancy yoga thing just so I could get moving again because I felt really sluggish. And now I think back about it, just I think those early signs from the body kind of saying, come on, you know, you need to rest up, something's not okay, kind of thing. And I remember having some really bad cramping as well from the very beginning. And again, I was, oh, you know, maybe this is what it was like the first time around. I can't really remember.
How many weeks were you at this point?
So I calculated it was about 5 weeks, 5 to 6 weeks. But when I rung the midwife, she said, oh, you're only about 5 weeks because she deemed me as irregular with my period, which I didn't realize because I'd not long had the coil removed. So things were all up in the air anyway. I'd never been irregular in my life. So I was a bit like, I was quite offended when she said it. I was like, oh, okay. But yeah, so um, the dreaded thing happened, went to the toilet and wiped, and of course, brown spotting appeared on the tissue. And that sinking feeling when you just know that this isn't right. And as much as you hear people saying, oh, I bled and it was okay and stuff, but and you know, 9 times out of 10, it is probably fine. But I just knew in that moment, this isn't right. And I remember saying to my husband, like, I'm spotting, and we both, I think he read my face and we just knew something wasn't right. And he said, you know, do you need to contact the midwife? And I said, well, I don't feel like I need to right now because it could just be, I don't know, implantation bleeding or whatever. So I was like, I don't feel any rush to kind of speak to anybody just yet. Let's just see how it goes, kind of thing. Um, and then yeah, the days just dragged, and it was the worst thing as well because we were expecting both our parents up at the weekend since we'd moved here. They were coming up for the first visit, so it was kind of like a big deal. And I remember just thinking, like, you know, I was like, what do I do if I have to go into hospital? Like, what am I going to do with my son? And I was thinking maybe it's a blessing that they're coming up because then they can look after my son. But if I have to go to hospital, and it was just really strange how things kind of lined up because, like, obviously my parents come in, it was like almost like the universe saying, okay, something huge is happening, we're just going to give you this support, we're going to send this support up to you right now because you're going to need it, kind of thing. And yeah, the bleeding got gradually worse, and I think as soon as it turned red, that was it for me. I think I knew that was it. I think that's it. It's not okay. Something's not right. And Dave, my husband, was going, you know, maybe we should go in and go and check. And I was like, no, I don't need to. I don't need people prodding me. I was like, I know something isn't okay. You know, my body's been telling me for days that it needs to rest, but not just rest, but to just not, like, I felt like I couldn't do anything. I was so worried that something, like, I felt like my body became really fragile.
Mm-hmm.
It's the only way I can describe it. Um, and then, yeah, the week just, those next few days were the slowest days. They dragged. It was so strange. And I remember I thought, well, I'm just going to let them know. So I rang the midwife and I just said, you know, I'm bleeding. And she was like, oh, are you kind of sure, kind of thing? And I was like, no, I am. It's not okay. You know, I know what's happening. I don't feel like it's an urgent care situation. I was like, I just wanted to kind of inform you. And she says, that's fine, just kind of keep us informed, if anything changes. Um, and yeah, I just remember it was a Saturday. So I'd found out we were pregnant on the Monday and then started to bleed on the Wednesday. So we'd hardly had any time to kind of sit with it. Um, and then on the Saturday, my husband's parents arrived. And it was kind of the Saturday when it had gone bright red. So it was the morning before they arrived when we had kind of rung the midwife and it had all kind of dawned on us that it was happening. And it was the strangest, the strangest day. It was so strange. Like we didn't feel we wanted to speak to anybody about it because we didn't even know how to process it ourselves. Like literally an hour before they arrived, we'd obviously come to the conclusion that it was, it had gone. Um, and I remember his parents came and you just kind of like slapped on this face of everything's fine, everything's great. We're so happy that you're here. And my son was so happy that they were there. But I think we were both so, so grateful because our son knew that something wasn't right with mummy and daddy. Like mummy and daddy weren't okay. So he had the distraction of his grandparents. And I think it was such a blessing. Like it was so odd how it had all kind of worked out. It's not odd, it's beautiful really. I think the universe has its, I believe that people come to you when you need them most, and that's kind of how I felt like we were being held by some greater force who were saying, okay, this big thing's coming. And like the first time round with COVID and you were isolated and you were on your own, we're going to send somebody here. So yeah, I just remember sitting there thinking, here I am just losing our baby whilst everybody's like none the wiser. And it was so strange, so, so strange. And I don't know really what I expected. Like the world doesn't stop, it doesn't stop spinning. And I didn't really want to make a fuss out of it either because I thought I hadn't even really processed this myself. So I didn't feel ready to kind of voice it to them. Um, and yeah, we went out for coffee and had lunch, and yeah, it was a very, very strange week. Um,
So this all happened from the Wednesday for then around 7 days.
mm,
And
yeah,
how
so
was it that was there a peak of when you noticed the blood loss and the pregnancy release? Did you notice that there was a peak in that and it kind of came down, or
yeah, so it spotted from the Wednesday, and then by Friday, Saturday, it was very heavy. It was like a really bad period. And the pains and the cramps, it was quite severe. I
more than
didn't
you'd experienced on a period pain? Because I know many women will have been told that, oh, it's just like a really intense period.
Yeah, it isn't the same as a period because I think this thing's coming away from your uterus that's obviously been prepared to carry the child. And I think I was thinking, oh, like it's not going to be so bad because technically I'm only kind of like 5 weeks. Like that's what they deemed me, only 5 weeks along, which is what, like 2 weeks technically,
Mm.
because don't they calculate from like your period, don't they? And I was thinking, not a lot kind of happened in 2 weeks. Um, but yeah, it reminded me very much of my after I gave birth, not as heavy, obviously, as the shed, what you shed after you've given birth, but it was very clotty. I had to regularly change my my towel, um, and yeah, it was it was just cruel in a way because I think you could physically see the loss. And yeah, so the heavy bleeding lasted probably for a few days, but I wouldn't say it really stopped until the following week, later into the week. Um, I remember thinking like, oh, like, I remember speaking to my sister-in-law about it, and she said, "Oh, the actual physical loss, like the losing of it, the clearing of the uterus, is the hardest bit because it's like the reminder of
Mm-hmm.
what was and what is now isn't." And I remember kind of sitting in it and thinking, okay, this is kind of cruel in a way. And I know my husband felt really lost because he didn't know really what he could do in that moment because obviously I was physically feeling it. Um, but honestly, the worst bit for me was when it stopped because I think it dawned on me. I was like, that's it, it's gone. That moment, I think I kind of sat with it and I thought, I can't feel it anymore. Like all my symptoms just like switched off. Like, like you get your tender breaths and you're feeling nauseous. Like everything just like something had just flipped a switch and everything just switched off for me. That was my experience. I don't know if it's a normal thing if people experience that. But yeah, I just felt like the body was kind of gone, right, I'm done now. That's it. We're okay. Kind of back to normal in a sense that, I've done what I needed to do. Um, yeah, I definitely felt into that. The very early stages was that I was trusting my body knew what it was doing because I didn't really know how to process it. Um, and when I told my mom and dad when they came, I became really diplomatic about it. I was like, "Oh, I just want to let you know that I've had a miscarriage. But it's okay, like it's totally fine." And I remember people were a bit like, "Oh, okay." And I don't know. I think that was just my grieving process. I think I hadn't really processed the feelings at that point because I didn't really know how to feel. I think because my body was going through the process of letting go, I didn't really know how to. I guess I felt I wasn't supporting the body by feeling like I wanted to help support it going through this letting go. I think this process of letting go, and I thought, well, if I'm sat here stressing or crying, or I'm not going to support it, I don't know. That's just kind of what my brain was thinking, I think, at the time. But I think grief is a process. It's a roller
Mm.
coaster process.
Oh,
um
yes, complete. I've worked with a number of women who have described it like this as well. And even in my own grieving process, I'm one that I want to be in my own cave and to process it alone. And I also step up to be this kind of very clear with what has happened, but I'm not so open initially with my feelings because it's literally a limbo state of going through this journey. I'm curious if you felt supported by your midwife, if she shared how to support yourself during this time, because it's a kind of for many women, if this hasn't been something that they've experienced before, or they've had friends or family, and the first thing could maybe to go straight to the emergency clinic. So it's kind of beautiful how you had this innate knowing that you needed to be at home and you let your midwife know, but you kind of knew that I can deal with this, I can be with this. So I'm just curious if you can go into that a little bit.
yeah, so I obviously spoke to them on the Saturday when it got quite heavy, and all they said to me was if it gets really bad, you what I think what she said to me is if you go through a pad like quicker than you would normally do with a period kind of thing. Like if you were soaking through
I think
within
it's
an
like a
hour,
pad every half an hour. There's like
yeah,
NHS to,
then it
that's
would
what they
be
say.
you're obviously hemorrhaging way too much blood. So I kind of kept that in my mind a little bit. And I think as well, because I'd had Jack, so I knew what was kind of normal of, like, it felt very much like after birth, and you're obviously having the afterbirth shed. It was very much like that. And I remember being told that at the time as well. You know, if you're going through a pad every half an hour, then it's not okay. But I think you would know. I'd like to think as women we would know if something was not okay. Um, and we needed to go and seek extra help. And there's no shame in that. If you don't feel like something's not okay, go and receive the help for it. And even if it's nothing, it really does not matter. But for me on that Saturday, it hurt and it was heavy, but it didn't feel unusually, like it didn't feel like it was not okay. So I was okay to kind of say, okay, that's fine. And I'd read as well online that there was little they could do because I was so early. I think if you're further along, there's more that they can do. And I think they said they could scan you internally. And even that, I thought, I don't even think I'd want that. If the body doesn't feel that it's okay, then the body is going to do what it needs to do, type of thing. I don't need anyone to kind of poke and prod me. But that's my personal, that's how I feel personally with it. But yeah, I delayed putting off I delayed trying to ring them back because obviously they'd booked me in for my booking appointment in 8 weeks. And there was no option. So they'd done it through an app and there was no option to cancel the appointment. And I thought in this day and age, there should be a cancel button. But there was nothing on there. And I just thought, I'm going to have to ring them and tell them. So I put it off for a couple of weeks, if I'm honest, because I just didn't want to have that conversation. And I kind of got to a day where I thought, no, okay, I feel okay today. Like, I feel strong today, so I'll ring them today. And it was awful. It was the most horrible experience. Like, no woman should ever have to ring up and cancel a booking appointment. And I just thought it was so rubbish. It just stunk. So yeah, I rang her and she said, "Oh, what's the problem?" And I just came out and said, I don't need the appointment. Oh, why not? Like, because I've had a miscarriage, so I don't need it. And you could hear her shock. She was like, oh, okay. Oh, are you sure? And I thought, yes, I'm sure. And of course, in that moment, it just brought everything back. And I was beside myself on the phone. I couldn't even get my words out. And this woman on the other, this poor woman on the side of the phone, she was, the position it puts them in as well must be so awkward because, yeah, just to have a cancel button, have a cancel button, somebody, please. But yeah, and she just said that's fine, like I'll cancel for you, no problem. And she just I don't really remember what she said to me, and I don't think it was anything I've ever used, to be honest, because all I remember her saying was, oh, well, if you decide to carry on, like if you want to try again, she was like, you need to make sure that you have a period. You have to have a period before you have another one. She's like, otherwise we can't calculate the next pregnancy. And I remember at the time thinking like, okay,
Oh my
okay.
God. Wow.
Okay then. Um, and yeah, that was kind of it really. And she was like, oh, okay, look after yourself type thing. And I came off the phone and I was just a bit like, okay, that was very surreal. And there was nothing, I had nothing come through to say that the appointment was cancelled. So I had no idea. I actually stressed myself out so much when it came to the appointment day because I thought she's not cancelled it because I've not had anything here to confirm that she's cancelled that appointment. And it sounds so crazy. Like, I remember opening up to my mum about it, and obviously she just didn't really get it. But it sounds so simple, but I was like, I shouldn't have had to ring. Why did I have to ring? And stir up all this emotion again and speak to somebody. It was just so strange and surreal. Um, but yeah, that's as much as I got from the
I
health
think
professionals.
that's a really like to go deeper into that would be, wow, another conversation. But I feel like that's deep within our bones of why you wouldn't want to make that call. Because if you were in community, like this, the women would be around you, like holding you and supporting you through this time, and they would know everything, like part of your journey. So I feel like it, for me, like when you're sharing, it's like creates this disconnect. And the way that you open up and you share, and this is like you are on this journey, on this rite of passage, and you have to make this phone call to then end the call and be like what just happened? Like, okay, and what's next? Like,
Mm,
wow.
yeah,
How did your
definitely.
mum feel and your husband? Like, how did they feel holding this for you? Because then you have the next phase, which is like the postpartum phase where your hormones are coming back into balance, where your body is realizing what journey it's just took. And then you have your body and then you have your mind putting the pieces together. And you, like you mentioned before, there's like this physiological aspect, but then there is this grief, this spiritual aspect, that is holding you through this whole experience as well. And grief is like it has its own dance, right? You can't ever predict how dance you can't predict how grief is going to like arise and when it's going to arise and what it's going to look like. So how was this part for you transitioning through this stage, like the moment of the release of your womb?
I don't know if this is something that other people do, but for me, my grief was a lot of questioning, not questioning in a very self-doubt way, like, oh, why has this happened to me? I never felt that way. Um, oh, there's something wrong, I've done something wrong. I never felt ever that way because I trusted that that's why I lent into that feeling and I trusted the body, knew what was right and what was wrong. My opinion didn't even need to come into it, because
Mm,
the body is what grows the baby. I don't grow it. The body grows it and nourishes it and feeds it. I can support that, I think, with what I do. Um, that's kind of where I position myself in that respect. So I felt there was a lot of times where when I was trying to think of it from a scientific point of view and how my body was working through it, I was thinking kind of on a wider scale. I was thinking spiritually, like this probably is going to sound incredibly woo-woo to a lot of people, but for me, it felt it was a gift, a very temporary gift. And it came and it offered me a gift. It offered me something, and then it did its job, and then it moved on. That's how I that's kind of how
mm,
yeah, that's kind of how I experienced the initial phase, and I still do to this point. I think I listened to a podcast on, I think it's Indie Birth. I
mm,
think it's Indie Birth. I can't remember entirely who it is. I'm really sorry. um, and she spoke about one of her miscarriages, and she said that she's had a few miscarriages, and she said that each time she's had a miscarriage, she feels this kind of like the most transformative things happen in her life. And it's
mm,
almost like the gift of this child is come and offered this transformation, and then it's done its job and then it goes. And I really liked that and I really held on to that fact. And I thought that's really beautiful. Um, that's just something that I felt very comforted by. Not to say that everybody will, um, but that's definitely how I felt. And I still feel really, it was definitely a process of transformation. And like with what I said at the beginning about the death, it felt like a rebirth for me.
mm.
So a part of me died and then I was reborn. Um, but
Mm.
yes, I don't
It's
think that answers your
beautiful.
question. I feel like I've gone off
I mean,
tangent.
this conversation could go off in so many places, right? As things arise. I can't remember if it was someone I was supporting or if it was on another podcast, but they said something that really stuck with me, which was when there is conception and when there is a pregnancy loss, there is a gift of this pregnancy deeply nourishing the womb. And then there's the release. So it's like this conception is about nourishing deeply the womb in preparation for whether there is another baby coming in or if there is another thing that you're working through and you need this space to be cleared, recharged, and nourished. And that was a really beautiful perspective for me and really shifted my mindset. And I think this is why it's beautiful having conversations because some things will resonate and some things won't. And that's totally okay because each pregnancy brings its own gifts. Whether at the end of it you have a baby in your arms or you don't, but it brings something because it's a rite of passage. You're in a known space, you go in onto this bridge towards the unknown. And whatever happens, you're still crossing over that bridge. And in that limbo state, you get to like go to the depths to pick up some gems and some insights. And this is what we bring back to the community, whether the community is physically there or they're online or it's your small like family, like whatever, you bring these gifts back because you're no longer the same. The part of you is still there, but it's like an additional part of you now. And you bring this wisdom back. And I think that is for the thriving then of humanity through the sharing of these stories and the wisdoms received as well. Because I've noticed that many women will tell me that once they've shared that they've had a pregnancy loss, so many women open up and share their story. But before that, they didn't even know that their mother or their sister or their friend had experienced this too. And I think that just highlights how this is kept so much in the shadows and how through these open conversations we can build courage to hold space to hear them because it's not comfortable. And there might be the mother, as she's sharing, may have different emotions arise. Like she might laugh, she might cry, she might get angry. Like all these emotions can come, but I feel like as a as a species that we're evolving right now, we can step into courage to hold space for everything that arises. Like we can hold this, we can witness them with us, and we don't need to fix anything. Yeah, as I say that, I do think that we can also become educated to understand, like, well, how can we support ourselves during pregnancy loss? What is our body asking for? And then also then as we follow through the stages, as our body moves through the postpartum phase, like what does that look like? And I feel this conversation is super needed. And I am just like I am so my heart is so open for you sitting with us and sharing your story, especially this is very recent for you. And with any rite of passage, it can take time to like, I mean, it's a journey, right? You describe this as a process, it's ongoing and will continue to offer you gifts throughout your life, this experience. And I feel the same with my brother's death. Like I spoke to someone on a podcast about 7 months after he died. And it wouldn't be the same podcast if I was to record it now because so much has come through it. So um I is that I mean there's so much that I could ask you right now, but is anything coming through that you would like to continue to add to this conversation?
Yeah, I think the main part for me was, like you say, the postpartum side of it. Nobody tells you about that. It's not something that really. I remember reaching out to somebody online, and I said, like I think
Mm.
I felt like I was frantically looking for something. I couldn't find it online. I couldn't find what's happening in my body, what is happening. I don't know, And I just remember that conversation where she said, you need to have a period before you have another child. And I was like, what happens if I don't get another period? What happens if it doesn't come back? What happens if I'm broken? You know, had all these fears and uncertainties. And I remember she said, your period should come back between 4 to 6 weeks, I think. I thought, what happens if I go over the 6 weeks? Am I broken? Is not something okay? And I was like, how do I know? How can I nourish my body? So I remember just reaching out to lots of people, kind of like, help, help. Do you know anything about this? Like, do you know what happens with the body? And, there's so much information out there about women's menstruation and kind of how that works and the science of it all and conception, all of that. There's so much information that you can sit there and go, I can completely understand what's happening. But I found nothing about miscarriage. And I stumbled across this university paper, and they were saying how if you don't nourish yourself, that you could have delayed periods and you could like delay your fertility. And I was thinking, at some point we probably will want to try again. I was thinking, oh, something that I do now, it could prevent it. And I was thinking, oh God. And yeah, and I just got to that point where I started thinking it the closer those 4 weeks to the 6 weeks started to arrive, I was thinking, am I going to get it? Is it going to come? Is it normal? And yeah, and I remember somebody who I reached out to, they came back and said, you're postpartum. You've technically gone through a pregnancy. Even though you've not got the baby, you're postpartum. And I was like, oh, okay, that makes sense. And it didn't even click in my mind that I was postpartum and that I needed to nourish myself the
Mm.
same way as I did after I had my son. I didn't even click. It didn't make sense to me. Um, and I felt guilty because I thought I've not been looking after myself. As soon as I stopped bleeding, I felt okay, and I kind of treated it like a period, like I just had a period, and I'm going to get back to it, kind of thing. I didn't treat it like I should have done. And I feel guilty for that looking back, because I think, that's really sad that I wasn't informed of that at the
Mm.
time. And I think it is the biggest part for me. It was the bit that I felt very, very lonely in, was the physical side of things. And when I did get my period and it did come back within the 4 to 6 week mark, I thought, oh, it's okay on my body. And I was wishing for it to come back. I was like, I need some sort of normality. I need a normal cycle. I need to know that my body's okay and it's doing
Mm.
everything that it needs to do. And yeah, that for me is the biggest thing. And that's why I wanted to speak up for it, because it's something that I think a lot of women potentially would feel very, very lonely in that process. And the scary thing was that it said that you could get pregnant even before you have your first period. And that terrified me a little bit, because I thought, would my body be ready for that? Like, and then part of it was, but I trust my body if that's what it wanted to do. And I was thinking, well, how do I know that it's okay if I've not had, what? Yeah, that was the biggest thing for me, was the physical side of things. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad you reached out because even when, if for women that are looking online, there's very little that comes up. If you type into Google, which is the main place, if you type in miscarriage or pregnancy loss, postpartum, there is very little that comes up. And if there's anything, it is linked to postpartum depression. Can I have postpartum depression? So that was very interesting to me. And I just feel like as soon as it's brought to light, oh, you're in postpartum, it's like this like light comes on. It's like, well, I know the basics of how to care for the body in postpartum. I know that she needs to be warm. I know that she needs to be nourished. I know that there's rest and body work. And then when you have these like pillars, it's easier then to care for oneself because there is roots then. There's things to kind of go off of instead of just like, oh, I'm on the other side now. So like what happens? And I think it is, if it's not in awareness, if it's not something experienced, then I would say that so many women get to that point and the light doesn't come on, and they go through this stage without that care. And I feel like the guilt that you expressed can also be a gem, because it wakes something inside of you to say, this can't be no more. Like, we need to have this conversation. And so this can be like passed on. And I really do believe, with this connection that we've had and through your sharing and bringing this to light, that we are going to create something so beautiful and so useful to mothers and to families and to birth keepers too. Like, I know a lot of doulas have reached out to see if they can come on to sit with us, because it's not something, when I went through my doula training, it wasn't something that we really dove into. And I really feel like this is the link, the continuum from how we care for ourselves during our bleed, so through our menstrual cycle, how that continues then to whether to any postpartum phase, to then continue into menopause. It's these stages of how practicing to deeply nourish ourselves through them pillars. And also, not just that, I also think any grief that we experience deserves the same pillars of health, like to come forward, like the warmth, the food, the rest, the body work, the held by a supportive community. And so I really feel deeply grateful for you sharing this, because it's taken me down a rabbit hole in the sense that I'm like looking to see, well, why isn't there so much here? And even my next go-to is Twitter or Instagram, typing in miscarriage postpartum or pregnancy loss postpartum. Can hardly find anything, like literally what pops up there. Same with podcasts, so it's like, but I'm not saying they're not in podcasts, because I know that the title of them sometimes doesn't reflect like the gifts that are inside of that podcast, from what I've found as well through conversations. Everything that you said today is just, my heart opened so much, and I feel this beautiful connection through listening to your story. I feel very honored that you've sat with me, with all of us today, to share this, because I know that it will help mothers through this time for sure.
Oh, thank you for receiving me and my message. I think, that's something that I hugely advocate with the work that I do, in allowing women to feel that they're heard and their voices are heard, but not just heard, but received. I think that's something
Yes.
that is a huge topic. Um, and to feel that I was received by you, in my time of grief is huge. It is massively huge. I'm so grateful for that. I'm so grateful that you've received me and held space for me on here to share my story. And it's a vulnerable story that I felt it needed to be shared. And, it was shared for me because that's something I want to honor. It happened. It's not just something that, I'll always, if I do have any more, it will always be, I had 3 pregnancies. It will always be honored because it meant something. It was there. It did something. Um, so it honors that it happened by speaking up, but also it it resonates strongly with me that it hopefully can help 1, 2, maybe 3 people feel less lonely and more connected. I feel that kind of fills me with a lot of warmth and love. And
Mm.
yeah, that's another thing that I feel has been channeled through me for my work. It's a message that I've been nudged to bring forward for a reason. So
Mhm.
thank you.
Mm. And could you share a little bit about the work um that you are going into right now, and what you are sharing in your online space? There was something else I was speaking to my friend today, and I was saying, like, it's incredible that, like undisturbed birth and like How Indie Birth is the podcast. I listened to that all the way through my pregnancy, bringing this to light. And there's so much to it. It's not just like one conversation or two. It's like there's so much to unravel with it. And I feel like this topic, alongside, I was saying to my friend, death in general, is something like to completely get into, because there is there's such a space missing, and there's also business in it as well, like um for a mother who doesn't know that she can go through an active pregnancy loss at home. And I'm curious to see how it continues to unfold with you because you've collected these gems.
Okay, so I'm a certified Reiki practitioner. So all the work that I do is laced with the beautiful gift of Reiki. So at the moment, it's evolving day by day, but my ultimate, I guess, North Star, shall we say North Star? Sounds very bro marketing.
Love
Um,
it.
um, is just to advocate for women to be heard. I think you said at the beginning of the podcast that, you felt like you didn't get heard at various parts in your life. And I think it's something that all women carry,
Mhm.
whether it's in our lifetime or our ancestors' lifetime. There's always that moment when we feel we're not being heard or listened to or received. Um, and so that I feel is my work. That's my reason for why I'm here, is support women feel and to open that space for them. Um, so yeah, so that's ultimately where my work is moving to, and it's evolving every day. That's what our work does. It evolves and it grows.
Oh yeah, especially when you're like connecting with other women as well. It's like you can't unhear like what you hear and receive sometimes, and that just totally like unleashes something like this with us.
Exactly. And it's funny because I remember I had a conversation with one of the Reiki masters in a conference like months ago. This is before I even had the miscarriage, and she was talking to me about like her work and kind of like how she integrates Reiki and whatnot. And I was like, I'm really stuck with my work and I don't know kind of how to take it. And she said, she started to tell me the story about how she had lost her son very early on in her life. Um, and she was trying to say that our work is driven by our experiences, our lives. And so she said, this experience happened and it was awful. But she said all of a sudden she started to hold space and nourish other people, other parents who had also lost a child. And she said, it's strange how these things happen. And she said, and then I had a divorce, and all of a sudden her work evolved again, and she started to nourish and hold space for people in that sense. And so when I had the miscarriage, it almost kind of, I remembered back to that conversation and I was like, that's exactly what it is. And I think some people have this preconception that people who are very spiritual have beautiful, easy lives and they just walk through it. Like we just walk on water because everything's just lovely. But it's like, no, life is just as rubbish for us too sometimes. So, but it's how you bring forth the work to other people. And I feel that's how it felt for me once I kind of got over the initial grieving stage, was that this is the work that I feel I need to bring forth now to other people to help them, to help nourish them and hold space for them. So
This is like the gems from the rite of passage, isn't it? Literally, like what you're talking about and what your teacher said to you. It's like bringing the gems back up. And if we don't, like, there's something inside of us. It's like, oh, it has to come out. Like, I have to share that, whether it's like in a blog or you're sitting with your friend or you're in circle, or it comes out later down the line when like your kids ask you something and you're like, oh, I didn't share this before because I didn't know that it would be, how it would be received. Hmm. Wow. I want to add as well for anyone's listening to this later on down the line, because this is the beauty of podcasts is people can pull them up a few years down the line. So I will be keeping the recordings from the two gatherings that we have and the resources that I'm going to be pulling together. They will be in there forever. And as long as my website is alive and kicking, these resources will be there. So there'll be a link in the show notes too, daniellekatherine.com/women's circle, and you'll find everything in there too. Wow. So I'm going to see you soon in a few days, actually. which I'm
Yeah,
really looking forward to. Honestly,
yeah.
trying to putting the two gatherings together, I'm like, oh my gosh, this is a lifetime worth of work because as I'm going down rabbits holes of like thinking like, what have I like shared with people I've like supported in the past? Like, what are you telling me? And like, what is wanting to come through? It's super interesting gathering all my thoughts and being like, how can I structure this in a way that is supportive? And not completely wild. So that's been an interesting and this is the kind of stuff I love. I love untangling like my mind and curiosity and putting it into something that's more digestible. That's like the thing that I absolutely love. So thank you.
No, it's beautiful. It's this is one thing that like with so I'm having my first circle on Saturday for people explaining what the conversation's about. But I'm holding my first sister circle on Saturday online, and it's to help support people in this way. And just it's been beautiful for me bringing forth my message to see kind of how it's evolved for you in your work and how you've taken
Mm,
it and grown it into something. And this is the power of collective, is women inspiring women. It's beautiful. I love it.
yes,
Thrive from it. And this is what
totally.
we need. So yeah.
Yes, yes, yes. Honestly, like I've learned so much being in circle. It's wild. Like, because you come in and you're not alone anymore in this, like, I mean, I think the world has moved so much towards this like hyper individualized way of healing. And then when you sit in circle, like not only is it a meditation because you're receiving, and that is a lot to just be focused on what that person is sharing with you without like getting entangled like with your own triggers or your own like beliefs about what this person should do, but literally receiving. And then there's no way that that can't have an effect on your life because you've received something different that you were receiving before. So of course, like it continues to evolve us as human beings. And I really think it's the way forward to like getting back to community. And I know like we're both online right now, but it is a start. And I've seen how it ripples out, like these spaces ripple out into real life. Like I hold physical circles wherever I go. But the online one is one that is stable. Like it happens every single week with usually the same people with women coming in. And it is just, it's where we're at with the times and we're making the most of it and hopefully inspiring the women too. I just feel like there should be in so many circles with like, I love the big ones, but I really feel like the smaller ones, like 6 or 10 people, you get so much in them too, in just a different way. Like I have one every Friday with six of my like really good friends, and it's just like, wow, like the amount that we go into, you couldn't do it with 20 people that like there would be no way to get that deep. So there is different circles for different needs, and I'm really happy to see that you are like bringing this forward into the world as well. So thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for being here. And I am really looking forward to like continuously getting to know you and receiving your gifts.
Thank you. Thank
Mm,
you
we
for having